Welcome to today's Bible study. We're in our third week of reading our way through Job, and we're going to read the first section of this Sunday's reading and then have a couple of questions. This is from Job chapter 14, verses 7 to 15. For there is hope for a tree, if it is cut down, that it will sprout again, and that its shoots will not cease. Though root grows old in the earth, and its stump dies in the ground, yet at the scent of water it will bud and put forth branches like a young plant. But mortals die and are laid low. Humans expire, and where are they? As waters fail from a lake, and a river wastes away and dries up, so mortals lie down and do not rise again, until the heavens are no more. They will not wake or be roused out of their sleep. Oh, that you would hide me in Sheol, that you would conceal me until your wrath is past, that you would appoint me a set time and remember me. If mortals die, will they live again? All the days of my service, I would wait until my release should come. Would you call, and I would answer? You would long for the work of your hands. So it's two particular verses out of today's reading that I want to look at. The first one is verse 10, this, but mortals die and are laid low. Humans expire, and where are they? We read from the Feasting on the Word resource that Job confesses what we all have to admit, that he really does not know what happens after death. And our first question is, what do you think happens after we die? Dianne, Linda, what do you think happens after we die?
I believe you're the expert. For these sorts of answers.
Well, I started off with an easy question, is what you're saying.
That's a question we've asked ourselves since forever, really.
Right. And
because I have never really formulated an answer that makes me really happy, other than all the pseudopsychology things, like you live on in the memory of people, and you live on in the hearts and minds of people whom you've loved or influenced in some sort of way. But I ask myself this question now when I talk to kids and somebody dies. Oh, it's nice. Those are nice words about memories and not losing a piece of your heart. And there are all those wonderful poems, every time the wind blows softly through the leaves, you will remember me. That feels good, but is it really an answer? I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, you always hope that people are going to remember you. But when I look at this and I thought about this question, I'm thinking about, okay, where does my soul, what happens to my soul? Because first of all, I believe that we have one. I think that we are who we are because of our soul. And so I think the soul leaves the body after death. I do believe that it does go to heaven. I think it is resting with God. And, since God is love, I also believe that we are surrounded by love. One thing that I think kind of has made an influence on me is reading about near-death experiences and where people have clinically died and what they experienced once they were gone. Their soul had been released. And it's even scientific people have had near-death experiences and have had amazing encounters with other beings, particularly their loved ones. And often you read it was loved ones who greeted them when, let's call it heaven, I'm not really sure, but let's say they went to heaven, and it was their own loved ones that greeted them. So I feel that, based on scripture, from what we know in scripture and some of these encounters that I've read about, that I don't have any doubt that that's one of the things, or that is a sequence of things that could happen.
I remember years ago, there was an Anglican priest, Tom Harper, wrote a book about near-death experiences of people that he had interviewed. And then one of our pastors in Nova Scotia, I believe, David McGinley, is a hospital chaplain in Nova Scotia, and he's written some work about near-death experiences, and certainly talks in the same way, Dianne, of that of people meeting loved ones after they've had or in the middle of having those experiences.
For myself, I'm speaking personally, having lost my father and my brother, it's very interesting what has happened. I have had dreams about them, and the physicality of the dreams, for me, my father embraced me and he put his cheek against my cheek. I could feel that cheek, and I thought, wow, that had never ever happened to me before.
Right.
So, that was something that all I can explain is that somehow, since his death, he's been able to. His soul, this is again what I believe, his soul was released, and this is what he could do. And my brother, the same thing. And then there's little signs that, for example, when my father died, it was at 11 a.m. And we were with him when he died. And in my family, we repeatedly see 11:11 on the clock. We happen to glance at the clock at 11:11, and it happens so often, especially to one of my sisters, that it doesn't seem like it would be a coincidence.
Right.
So, it's just things like that for me, it reinforces that they have some way of connecting with the ones that are left behind. And
Right.
it gives me, so much peace, so much.
Yeah.
I do believe, and I've experienced this with a couple of friends who influenced me, obviously, and it was they're beginning to feel comfortable with that sort of explanation of there being a life outside of what we're familiar with and comfortable with. I believe that we're not open to a lot of things, and I wouldn't want to say, oh yes, I absolutely believe that, in whatever 1403 Cameron Collin inhabited the body of, Jamie McDougall and lived in Iona, but I do believe that there are energies out there that we're just not open to. We just don't understand them, and so we we turn glad to add to them. We don't really want to go there because they're inexplicable. But
Right.
anyway, I just wondered, I find it fascinating, the link between Jews of the Old Testament, Muslims, mostly Eastern religions that we don't have any relationship with. Many of these stories and ideas are entwined in some kind of way, and that's why I asked about reincarnation. You know, this feeling of the soul living on in, you know, perhaps a real form, in possibly.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, I think there is part of the Reformed tradition, in particular, that has lost an appreciation of mystery, and we try really hard to explain. And so when I think at times that we've come up against that, that's part of how we've lost that connection to the things we don't understand. And so in a case like this of what happens after death, we want an explanation as to what happens. And once that comes into our mind, we sort of close off the potential of other connections. Or we open up the potential to other connections based on what we've decided we believe. So, okay, if we move on to the next verse, this verse 13. Oh, that you would hide me in Sheol, that you would conceal me until your wrath is past, that you would appoint me a set time and remember me. This is Job appealing to God. Sheol is the deep, is the place where people went after they had died and waited, right? Their bodies, their souls waited. Now, one of the same commentary that I had read the piece from before talks about this waiting of Job. The waiting of Job and the waiting of Holy Saturday. This reading is actually used on Holy Saturday, that time between Good Friday and Easter Sunday, are like waiting for a teenage son or daughter who has missed a midnight curfew to come home, or waiting for the surgeon to emerge from the hospital operating room, or waiting for the phone to ring with the report of the biopsy results, or waiting for the dust of an earthquake to settle so that you can find out if anyone is trapped under the rubble. Like Job's question, Holy Saturday is a day of suspense. We hang between two worlds, the world of darkness, death, and despair, and the world of resurrection light and the hope of new and eternal life. And so the question is, what is it like to wait in one of those scenarios? What is it like to have one of those scenarios where we're caught between two places and to be waiting in the midst of those two? Now, fortunately, my kids were good, and I never had to have long panics after broken curfews. I do know what it's like to wait for the surgeon to emerge from the hospital operating room, though. With my dad, he had aneurysm surgery, and I remember waiting in the waiting room with my mother, and the surgeon had said, "Oh, it's going to be 6 hours for the surgery." So we had been in the waiting room and we'd gone, had something to eat, and we went back to the waiting room, and we left and we walked around and we went back to the waiting room. And we were then just sitting there waiting because there was no point in going home and coming back and all of that. And then the surgeon walked in after 4 hours. Yes. Yes. We immediately went to panic. How can you be done sooner? He must have died on the table.
Mhm.
And the surgeon came in, and he was happy, and we couldn't figure out why he was happy when he was early. And so he said the surgery went really well. It was easier than he had predicted. Everything was good. And so, my dad had been moved to recovery, and we could see him in a couple hours. And after he had sort of gone through all that, he asked if there were any questions. And I said to him, "Why did you tell us it was going to be 6 hours?" And he said, "Well, I always tell families that it's going to be longer than it is. He says, that way, if it is a problem, then nobody's worried about the fact that it's longer." And I said to him, "Did you ever think about what it means for it to be shorter?" And he said, "Yeah, it's a good thing." I said, "From your perspective, yes.
Right.
From our perspective, not so much."
Yeah.
Right? And he looked at me and he said, "I've never thought of it that way in 20 years that I've been operating. So I'm going to have to think about what I say next time." Right? But that suspense, that being in limbo of things literally hanging in the balance, is a hard place to be.
I don't know if we've discussed this before. Really waiting for anything, it is hard, especially when the potential result is so dramatic. It's going to be life altering, whether it's a positive or a negative result. People wait every day for someone to die,
Mm-hmm.
knowing that it's going to happen, and you think it would be better if you knew when it was going to happen, but you don't want it to happen. It's hard. It's very hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's so many emotions that you experience. Of course, anxiety and feeling hopeless and helpless, and you're uncertain, you're afraid, you may be in despair. And then when I think of the teenager, I think about anger and frustration and something I might regret. I think there's a whole range of emotions that people experience in circumstances like that.
Yeah. And I know for Job, it was an incredibly difficult time, having lost his possessions, having lost his family, having essentially lost his friends as well. We're in a section where there's 3 conversations with 3 of his friends, so 9 conversations altogether. And none of the conversations with his friends are supportive, really. They're trying to convince him that he must have done something wrong if God's treating him in this way. So in some ways, he's even lost his friends. There is also a time of suspense in a good way. Part of what I love about kids and Christmas is the suspense of what's going to happen on Christmas Day. And not to get too wrapped up into the materialistic aspect of it, but when I see in kids the desire, the longing, the anticipation, the the wanting to rush into the joy of Christmas, but know that that's not until tomorrow, but they want it to be today. I think in some ways we're caught in that in between time as well. And certainly we can see it in the negative ways that I read, but we can also see it in the good ways through kids. right? Of waiting for that something good and new to be born or to appear or to be given to us or whatever. It's still difficult to be in that in between.
But exciting.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes.
Well, that's what Advent's all about, isn't it?
Yeah. It's supposed to be what Advent's all about, right? I think sometimes as we get older, we lose that, and Advent becomes, well, who's coming over? When are the parties? What's, can I get out and get the shopping done? What's it? And we lose some of that excitement. So, but yeah.
I also think when situations are difficult and either you're the one that's facing something serious or you have a loved one facing that, I certainly have found that my faith and prayer have helped me get through that. It's relieved some of the stress that I might be feeling, the anxiety, and it gives me a feeling of hope. Not to be sort of morbid or anything, but when my brother was dying last year and we were with him, he had faith. He had strong faith, more so than I've ever seen. He gave up his old life and created a new life, sold everything. It was really quite miraculous. And so I knew that he was at peace. And that helped me to be at peace. But even in other situations where, it's not been as dramatic, but the prayer, the belief, the faith, it gives me hope. And at the very least, it calms me. It helps my anxiety to, I can handle it a little bit better.
Right.
I'm not saying it goes away, but it's not as bad because I see that I believe that there is going to be, no matter what the outcome, there will be something to be joyous about, to celebrate. And that's why we celebrate lives too. It's part of why we celebrate lives at funerals.
Right.
One of the best books that I've read in a long time. I don't know, Linda, if you were part of Bible study at that point, but Anxious for Nothing by Max Lucado.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was a fantastic book, and I have gone and I've reread it. Excellent book to give you strength and faith.
Yep. Yeah, certainly our anxiety at times can overwhelm us, right? And make it hard to figure out anything other than that thing that is causing the anxiety. Our faith is supposed to help us with that, and some days that's easy, and other days not so much. So, any other comments about the readings?
Mm-hmm. Just that Job still his old self.
Yes. Yep.
One question. Can I ask something?
Sure.
When we started reading about Job, and even after he lost his family, everything, he still seemed so strong in his faith. What happened? I'm curious.
You mean what happened?
Why did he change?
Well, I don't have a good answer for that. I mean, a concise answer for that. I think that part of this story of Job is the story that we all go through. It's easy at times to have that initial reaction of faith, and then it's hard to sustain that. It's not always easy to maintain our faith, and I think there are at least been moments in my life where there's been sort of that darkness that has entered my faith. What strikes me about Job, though, is that even in that second verse that we highlighted about going to Sheol, he's still in conversation with God. And he's asking for there to be a time where he can be separate from the world, and a time that God will remember him. To me, that is still a faithful reply, as opposed to saying, "Oh, forget it, God. I've had enough. I'm done. I'm just done with you. And whatever you want to do, you go and do, and I'm going to go off and do whatever I want to do." So I think that his faith, as we're reading through this story, is changing. And it's not necessarily the strong assurance that we saw earlier, but it may be changing in a way that we know relationships change over time, right? Because it would have been very easy for Job to, when all of that happened, to just say, "Forget it. I'm done with God." And I know people who have done that, and I don't begrudge them that decision at all. It makes sense in some cases for people to say that. I think they lose out an awful lot in the long run about God's love and understanding the world and all of that. But it also makes sense when you've suffered to this degree to want to just say, I'm done. So
I kind of felt the same way when I got to the end of that passage. I thought, this is really remarkable that he has said basically, "Why me?" and "Please don't make me suffer anymore." But he is still saying it to God. He's still turning to God, excuse me, and expecting and wanting and comfort and assurance.
yeah.
Pardon me. So,
Yeah.
poor guy.
Yeah.
It's up for him so far.
Yep. So, and we'll get through the rest of it and see how the story turns out. So.
Do you feel like a famous storyteller? Wait till next week. It will unfold.
Yeah. So, well, thank you for joining me again, and we'll pick up where we left off in the next session.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
And bye.